Thank you. I'm very pleased to take part in the FAB project final conference on behalf of the International Labour Organization, a project that, as we have just seen in the video, has demonstrated that integrating refugees into labour markets is both necessary and possible. From the start, the ILO, the UN Agency for the World of Work, has been engaged in the employment and labour aspects of refugees. Since 1919, in the aftermath of World War I, the organization was actively involved in helping refugees find jobs and protecting them from exploitation. In fact, the ILO Constitution promotes a social justice mandate, referring specifically in its preamble to the protection of the interests of workers when employed in countries other than their own. The ILO does this by promoting decent work approaches, by which we mean the provision of work and income opportunities for all, but also the promotion of workplace rights, equality, and social dialogue. According to the ILO, decent work sums up the aspirations of people in their working lives for opportunity and income, rights, voice, and recognition. The imperative to protect refugee workers and ensure access to decent work for all may never have been more urgent than it is today, as the number of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons who are moving in search of safety, security, and livelihoods continues to increase around the world. According to the latest UNHCR figures, almost 80 million people, representing 1% of the world's population, are forcibly displaced. Of those, about 26 million are refugees. This is the highest total number ever recorded. At the same time, the average duration of displacement has also increased. With more refugees caught in long-term situations of displacement with few prospects of returning home in the near future, the search for sustainable solutions, including through access to decent work that allows refugees to provide for themselves and their families in conditions of dignity, is vital. And while today's focus is on the European context, it is important to recall that 85% of refugees are in fact hosted in developing countries. Today, the top refugee hosting countries are Turkey, Colombia, Pakistan, and Uganda, all countries which are struggling with their own labor market challenges, including high unemployment and informality. This often leads to competition among refugees and nationals for poor quality jobs. Recent ILO research indicates that the socioeconomic shock brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated many of the adverse conditions facing refugees while reducing their access to coping strategies. As a result, many have faced worsening working conditions and weakened protections. Despite this, the ILO is encouraged by the increased number of governments and partners who recognize that refugees are not mere recipients of long-term aid. They are proactive agents of development. Refugees are producers, consumers, and entrepreneurs who make autonomous decisions about their livelihoods, the application of their skills and qualifications, and their socioeconomic well-being. We also know that forced displacement is deeply disruptive to women and men's lives, creating breaks with former sources of livelihoods, as well as in training and education. Their ability to rebuild their lives is mediated by a number of factors, including gender, age, government policies, and a series of practical issues. For instance, we know that women and men are affected differently in situations of conflict and displacement. Women may find themselves propelled into the labor market as the heads of household or with additional caring roles without family or state support. Discrimination hampers their ability to contribute fully to their families and societies. This leaves them particularly exposed in times of crisis, as again, we have seen in the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. But out of crisis can emerge opportunities for women to take up new roles, utilize their training and skills, and challenge traditional power dynamics, which we can only encourage. Government policies based on international labor standards that promote equality of treatment and opportunity among all workers are a necessary starting point. Over the last century, the ILO has adopted hundreds of international labor conventions and recommendations, a large number of which apply to refugee workers. For instance, the ILO's Migration for Employment Conventions, which cover refugees and their recruitment, and the ILO Recommendation number 205 on employment and decent work for peace and resilience, adopted in 2017, provides global normative guidance for the world of work's contribution to refugee integration. In 2016, The ILO also adopted the guiding principles on the access of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons to the labor market. These provide a set of voluntary, non-binding principles for governments, employers, and workers' representatives and other stakeholders aimed at enabling refugees to access decent work opportunities. But before I show a brief video summing up the guiding principles, I would like to finish by sharing a few lessons learned from ILO's experiences in developing strategies to create decent work opportunities for refugees. Of course, these are mainly drawn from our work in developing countries, but I hope you will find them useful. First, we have found that comprehensive strategies, which combine both supply and demand side approaches to job matching and employment creation, while taking into account the broader development context, work best. Second, strategies that are inclusive, meaning that they bring together both host communities and refugees, are conducive to social cohesion and sustainability. And finally, strategies are focused on getting refugees into quality jobs, and I emphasize quality, those that maintain rights and improve working conditions for all workers, provide dignity and purpose, are the ones that make a difference. I will stop there. Thank you very much. And I will ask Antonia if she can turn on the brief video that summarizes the guiding principles on refugees' access to decent work. Thank you very much.
The International Labour Organization is the United Nations Agency for the World of Work. It has a mandate to protect the rights and interests of all workers, including those employed in countries other than their own. Situations of forced displacement, where people have been forced to flee their countries due to conflict, violence and human rights violations, affect millions of people around the world and can last for extended periods of time. This creates considerable challenges for refugees as well as for affected communities and countries, particularly those already struggling with limited resources. Access to decent work is an integral part of sustainable response strategies, yet refugees' capacity to find decent work often depends on the economic and labor market conditions of the host country, as well as on legal and regulatory restrictions and other practical issues such as language and administrative barriers. As a result, refugee workers are often concentrated in low-skilled informal employment or under-regulated sectors where they are prone to decent work deficits, including discrimination and exploitation. The guiding principles on the access of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons to the labor market were endorsed by the ILO's governing body in 2016. They provide a set of voluntary non-binding principles rooted in international labor standards and universal human rights instruments and inspired by good practices implemented in the field. They aim to guide governments, employers and workers' organizations and other national and international stakeholders in enabling refugees to access decent work opportunities that allow them to apply their skills and talents to jobs and enterprises that enliven labor markets, which in turn can help accelerate economic growth for all communities. The principles provide guidance on the critical areas of support for improving access, providing guidance to member states and national social partners to formulate national policies and action plans to ensure the protection of all workers in the labor market. Encouraging the formulation of coherent development strategies, including active labor market policies that support investment in decent job creation. Providing guidance to member states and social partners on national policies to promote equality of opportunity and treatment for all, recognizing the specific needs of women, youth, and persons with disabilities. These include efforts to ensure that refugees, like all workers, are aware of and can enjoy their rights, including through social dialogue. Promoting national, bilateral, regional and global dialogue on the labor market implications of large influxes of forcibly displaced persons. Once refugees can return voluntarily to their countries of origin, joint efforts will be required to support their socio-economic reintegration, including to assist countries of origin in ensuring decent work opportunities to support reconstruction efforts and leverage skills, employment, and enterprise assets which returnees developed abroad. Labour mobility can serve as an additional pathway for admitting refugees to host countries and should be developed or expanded in accordance with international labour standards. To find out more about the guiding principles on the access of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons to the labour market, please visit www.ilo.org/guiding-principles.